Resuming debate, reprise de débat, l'honorable député d'Abitibi-Témiscamingue.
The honourable member for Abitibi-Témiscamingue. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm pleased to speak once more to Bill C-45 now that it is at report stage. I already had the opportunity to speak at second reading of the bill, So I won't come back to the issues I've raised before, but I'd like to speak to a few things that have been changed at committee. First of all, the limit of 100 centimeters was arbitrary. I did not understand why it had been put in there. But at committee, experts have told us that to limit the height to 100 centimeters would be a mistake because shorter plants have a higher THC concentration, therefore produce more psychoactive ingredients, and the taller plants had a lower THC concentration, so the height limit was removed, and that was a good thing. At committee as well, we unfortunately learned that the Liberal government's position is preventing us from having the best possible bill. There's so much partisanship that our party had asked to eliminate this height limit. We tabled the amendment. The Liberals voted against it. They would rather do that and introduce their amendment, which was almost identical, and they did so a few moments after rejecting ours. So that's probably not the best way to deal with an issue which is so important, and I'm disappointed with the Liberals' attitude. Also, at committee, we had not opened the door to studying edibles. But now edibles will be studied, but only in a year. And I'd like to speak to cannabis edibles. I think it's very important. What has to be understood is that as far as cannabis is concerned, if you take it as a dried herb, it is smoked. So inhaling cannabis smoke is toxic for the lungs. But regardless of what we'd smoke, be it tobacco or anything else, it's bad for your lungs because you're inhaling smoke. Based on the studies I've read, for the same quantity of smoke, cannabis smoke is 10 times more bad for the lungs, 10 times worse than cigarette smoke. I want to be clear. I'm not telling people to go smoke cigarettes. I just want to make sure that people understand that cannabis smoke is bad for your lungs. It's toxic when inhaled. Now, if you take cannabis edibles, at least you would eliminate the toxic aspect of inhaling. But why has the government chosen to first allow people to smoke weed legally and then to allow them to eat cannabis edibles? That doesn't make sense. And quite a few people in my writing said, first of all, we want to bring down smoking rates, and yet we're legalizing the smoking of weed. As well, if you take edibles, cannabis drops or cannabis oils, it's easier to better calibrate or control the content of the psychoactive ingredient in these edibles. So I'd like to talk about those two specific ingredients. And studies have had interesting things to say about this. So there are two active ingredients in cannabis. There's THC and CBD. Now, these two substances act differently. They're both present, and they'll act on the body in different ways. THC is the substance which makes people high. It's the more psychoactive ingredient. And THC can help alleviate pain, can stimulate appetite, relax muscles, control epilepsy, and control nausea. However, it is also the ingredient which makes people high. So that's THC. When it comes to CBD, this is an ingredient which is not psychoactive. It does not make people high. It can help control pain, control nausea, reduce anxiety, control epilepsy, help the immune system, help muscles relax. It's an anti-psychoactive ingredient. It reduces inflammation, helps control insomnia, and has a calming effect. The reason why I want to talk about these two ingredients is because many studies have pointed to the fact that increasingly pot on the street contains ever higher concentrations of THC and ever lower concentrations of CBD. Therefore, increasingly, there are more cases of psychosis in people because CBD levels are lower, and yet CBD has a neutralizing effect on THC, which can provoke states of psychosis. So on the street today, pot has more THC. Therefore, pot you can buy off the street is increasingly dangerous. The reason I want to talk about this now is because when you get into edibles, you'll be able to control exactly the levels of THC and CBD. So with edibles, you can prevent side effects from street pot. And it's one way of controlling side effects or the psychotic effects of the weed you can buy off the street. When you dry a plant, it's very hard to control its active ingredients. So we're going to be legalizing a product whose ingredients are more difficult to control, whereas we're waiting to regulate edibles where we can control the active ingredients, namely THC and CBD. That's a little strange as far as I'm concerned, and I think it would have made more sense to start by regulating edibles, regulating them, imposing limits, and so on and so forth. Another reason why it would be a good idea to begin by regulating edibles, apart from being able to control the levels of the psychoactive ingredients, is because it's easier to conduct research on edibles. Even though research has started on edibles, there isn't that much of it. Researchers are starting to study the physical effects of cannabis edibles. There's a lot of anecdotal evidence out there and not many formal studies. So at this point here, the results are not conclusive because, as I said, there's a lot of anecdotal evidence which has led to conclusions about the physical effects of edible cannabis. Many people will take cannabis for recreational reasons, but also because it does them good in some way. Some people might start smoking it recreationally and find out that pot helps them sleep better or helps them address some health concerns. So it's one thing to take pot recreationally, but it's not good enough to have only anecdotal evidence on the potentially positive effects taking pot recreationally might have in addressing health issues. So some people might smoke weed, but they will not know exactly how smoking it will affect them. Whereas with edibles, it would have been easier to calibrate the active ingredients. And it would have been easier to measure the effects on people's health of cannabis edibles. So it would make sense to regulate edibles now and not just start with dried weed. That doesn't make sense as far as I'm concerned.
Member of Infrastructure and Communities has a point of order.
Yes, Madam